Silas Blackwood stood on the weathered platform of Dust Devil Creek's single railway station, his broad shoulders squared against the afternoon sun, his calloused hands gripping the brim of his hat with barely concealed nervousness. At 34, he had built a successful homestead in the high country through sheer determination and back-breaking labor, but he had built it alone. The loneliness had finally driven him to do what he had sworn he would never do, send away for a mail-order bride through the matrimonial agency in San Francisco. The advertisement had promised a woman of practical disposition, experienced in frontier life, seeking a hard-working husband. Silas had responded honestly in his letter, describing his remote homestead, the harsh winters, the demanding work. He had not mentioned that he was a virgin, that his entire adult life had been spent in the company of horses and cattle rather than women, that the very thought of intimacy terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He assumed the agency would send someone appropriate, someone who understood what mountain life required. The stagecoach rattled into the station in a cloud of dust, and Silas's heart hammered against his ribs. Around him, townspeople had gathered, as they always did when the stage arrived, hungry for gossip and entertainment. He wished they would disperse, wished this moment could be private, but Dust Devil Creek was a small town with little excitement, and the arrival of a mail-order bride was the best entertainment they had seen in months. The driver climbed down and opened the door, extending his hand to help the passenger descend. What emerged made the crowd gasp, then erupt into barely suppressed snickers and outright laughter. Instead of the sturdy, mature woman Silas had expected, a girl stepped down from the coach, no more than 17 or 18, severely obese, with tear-streaked cheeks and eyes wide with terror. She wore a threadbare dress that strained at every seam, and she clutched a battered carpetbag as though it were the only solid thing in a tilting world. "That's your bride, Blackwood," someone called out, and cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. "Looks like they sent you two women in one." The girl flinched as if struck, her face crumpling with shame. She looked desperately around the platform, clearly wanting to flee but having nowhere to go. The stagecoach driver handed down an envelope marked with Silas's name, then climbed back to his seat, eager to be away from the unfolding spectacle. Silas stood frozen, his mind reeling. This was not what he had expected, not what he had been promised. The agency had deceived him, or perhaps been deceived themselves. He could refuse her, send her back, demand the return of the substantial fee he had paid. The crowd clearly expected him to do exactly that, to reject this frightened girl and make her humiliation complete. But as he watched her shrink under the weight of mocking stares, something shifted in Silas's chest. He saw not her size, but her terror, not the discrepancy from his expectations, but her desperate vulnerability. He knew what it felt like to be judged, to be found wanting by society's arbitrary standards. He had been the strange boy who preferred animals to people, the awkward young man who fled to the mountains rather than conform to town life. Who was he to cast stones? Silas stepped forward, his boots loud on the wooden platform. The laughter died away as people watched to see what the mountain man would do. He stopped in front of the girl, his imposing height and muscular build making her seem even smaller, and spoke in a voice pitched for her ears alone. "Miss Thompson, I presume?" She nodded, unable to speak, fresh tears spilling down her round cheeks. "My name is Silas Blackwood. I believe you're meant to be my wife." "I'm so sorry," she whispered brokenly. "I know I'm not what you wanted. I know I'm not what anyone would want. My stepfather arranged everything through the agency. He said it was my only chance, that no one else would ever take me. If you want to send me back—" "I don't," Silas interrupted firmly. Then, in a louder voice that carried across the platform, he said, "Welcome to Dust Devil Creek, Clara May. Let's get you home." He picked up her carpet bag with one hand and offered her his other arm. For a moment, she simply stared at it, as if she had never been offered such basic courtesy. Then, trembling, she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. Her fingers were ice cold, despite the warm day. Silas led her toward his wagon, acutely aware of every whisper, every mocking glance. He helped Clara May onto the seat with as much dignity as he could muster, then climbed up beside her. As he gathered the reins, the town doctor stepped forward, a decent man named Foster, who had never participated in the crowd's cruelty. "Blackwood," he said quietly, "if the young lady needs anything, medical attention or such, you know where to find me." Silas nodded his thanks, grateful for the one voice of compassion in the sea of judgment. Then he urged the horses forward, leaving Dust Devil Creek and its poison behind. The journey to Silas's homestead took 3 hours, following a winding trail that climbed steadily into the pine-covered mountains. For the first hour, Clara May wept silently, her shoulders shaking with the effort of containing her sobs. Silas said nothing, sensing that words would be inadequate, that she needed time to release the shame and fear that had been building since she left wherever she had come from. As they climbed higher and the town disappeared behind them, Clara May's tears gradually subsided. She began to look around at the landscape with red-rimmed but curious eyes, taking in the towering pines, the glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance, the crystal stream that paralleled the trail. "It's beautiful," she finally said, her voice hoarse from crying. "It is," Silas agreed, "harsh in winter, but beautiful year-round. The homestead is in a protected valley about an hour ahead. Good land, good water, plenty of game." Clara May was quiet for another mile, then said softly, "Why didn't you refuse me? Back at the station, you had every right. I'm not what the agency promised you." Silas considered his answer carefully. "Neither of us got what we expected today," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean we can't make something decent out of the situation. You needed a place to go, and I needed someone to share the work and the life I've built. The rest, well, we'll figure it out as we go." "I've never been on a homestead before," Clara May admitted. "I grew up in Philadelphia. My mother died when I was 12, and my stepfather remarried within 6 months. His new wife didn't want me around, said I ate too much and cost too much to keep. When the matrimonial agency contacted him about placing girls out west, he jumped at the chance to be rid of me." Her voice was flat, reciting facts that had clearly been repeated to her many times. "He told me I was lucky anyone would take someone like me, that I should be grateful and obedient to whatever man was foolish enough to accept me." Anger burned hot in Silas's gut at the casual cruelty she described. "Your stepfather is a fool and a coward," he said bluntly. "Whatever else happens, you'll never hear me say you should be grateful I took you. If anyone should be grateful, it's me for getting help with the homestead." Clara May looked at him with something like wonder, as if kindness was a foreign language she barely recognized. They rode in silence for a while longer, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the chirping of birds in the trees. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the trail crested a ridge, and Silas pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing down into the valley below. "That's home." Clara May leaned forward, her breath catching. The valley was a sheltered paradise, with a log cabin nestled against a forested hillside, a barn, and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Fields of grain rippled in the breeze, and fat cattle grazed in fenced pastures. A stream wound through the property, feeding into a small pond that reflected the golden sky. It was clearly the product of years of hard work and careful planning. "You built all this yourself?" Clara May asked, awed. "Most of it," Silas confirmed. "Had some help with the barn raising, but the rest I did alone over the past 8 years. It's a good life, but it's a lot of work for one person. That's why I sent for a wife." As they descended into the valley, Clara May seemed to straighten slightly, as if the beauty and peace of the place were lending her strength. When Silas helped her down from the wagon in front of the cabin, she stood looking at it with an expression he could not quite read. "Come inside," Silas said. "I'll show you around, and we'll figure out sleeping arrangements." The cabin was larger than Clara May had expected, with a main room dominated by a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a good stove, and 2 separate bedrooms. Silas led her to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms, which was clean and simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. "This will be your room," he said. "The other is mine. I know we're supposed to be married, but I figured we could take our time with all that. Get to know each other first." Clara May's relief was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered. "I was afraid—" She broke off, unable or unwilling to articulate her fears. Silas understood. "I won't force myself on you," he said firmly, holding her gaze so she would know he meant it. "Not tonight, not ever. When and if we come together as husband and wife, it will be because we both want it, not because some paper says I have the right. Do you understand?" She nodded. Fresh tears, but different tears. Tears of relief rather than despair sliding down her cheeks. "I understand." "Good. Now, you must be hungry. Let me put together some supper while you wash up and settle in. Tomorrow, we can start figuring out how to divide the work, but tonight, you just rest." Silas left her alone and went to the kitchen, where he began preparing a simple meal of fried ham, biscuits, and canned beans. As he worked, he tried to organize his chaotic thoughts. Nothing about this day had gone as he had imagined, but he did not regret his decision to claim Clara May. There was something about her vulnerability, her obvious intelligence despite her fear, that called to him. And if he was honest, her size did not repel him, as society said it should. She was soft and womanly, and he found himself drawn to her in ways he had not expected. But more than physical attraction, he felt a fierce protectiveness toward her. She had been thrown away by the people who should have valued her, mocked by strangers, sent to a life she knew nothing about. If he could give her safety and dignity, help her find her strength again, that would be worth more than any perfectly matched marriage. They ate dinner in careful silence, both exhausted by the emotional turmoil of the day. Afterward, Clara May insisted on washing the dishes, despite Silas's protests that she should rest. He realized she needed to feel useful, to prove she could contribute, so he let her work while he banked the fire for the night. When they finally parted to their separate rooms, Silas lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling beams he had hewn and fitted himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The town would talk. Clara May would need time to adjust to the harsh realities of mountain life. And there was the matter of the marriage itself, legal but not yet real, a promise made but not fulfilled. He wondered if they could make it work, this strange arrangement born of desperation and deception. But as he drifted toward sleep, he thought of the brief smile Clara May had given him when she saw the homestead, and he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps unexpected beginnings could lead to worthwhile endings. The following days fell into a tentative rhythm as Silas and Clara May learned to navigate their new lives together. Silas showed her the daily routines of the homestead, milking the cow, collecting eggs from the chickens, tending the vegetable garden, feeding the livestock. Clara May approached each task with determined concentration, clearly anxious to prove her worth despite her obvious inexperience with farm work. She was clumsy at first, unused to physical labor, and embarrassed by her limitations. She could not lift the heavy water buckets or haul feed sacks the way Silas could, and she tired quickly in the high altitude, but she was also stubborn and refused to give up, pushing herself until Silas had to gently intervene. "You don't have to do everything at once," he told her one afternoon when he found her struggling to carry an armload of firewood that was clearly too heavy. "You're still adjusting to the altitude and the work. Give yourself time." "I want to be useful," Clara May said, frustration and desperation mingling in her voice. "I don't want you to regret bringing me here." Silas took the firewood from her arms and set it down, then looked at her seriously. "Clara May, listen to me. I don't regret it. Not for a moment. You don't have to earn your place here by working yourself to exhaustion. Just do what you can, and that will be enough." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the hidden contempt, but finding only sincerity. Slowly, she nodded. "I'll try to believe that." As the weeks passed, Clara May found her rhythm. She discovered she had a talent for the garden, coaxing impressive yields from the rich mountain soil. She learned to make bread, cheese, and butter, and proved to be a better cook than Silas had ever been. The cabin began to feel more like a home, with curtains in the windows and wild flowers in a jar on the table. More importantly, she began to relax around Silas. The constant tension in her shoulders eased. She smiled more often, even laughed occasionally at Silas's dry observations about the chickens' personalities or the stubbornness of the mule. They talked in the evenings after the work was done, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Silas found himself falling for her in ways he had not anticipated. It was not just her appearance, though he had come to find beauty in her round face and soft curves. It was her intelligence, her quiet strength, her determination to build a life despite everything that had been done to her. She was resilient in a way that awed him, and he caught himself watching her as she worked in the garden or read by the fireplace in the evenings, feeling something warm and protective growing in his chest. For her part, Clara May was discovering that Silas Blackwood was unlike any man she had ever known. He was patient and kind, teaching her new skills without mockery when she failed. He was strong, but never used his strength to intimidate. He respected her privacy and her boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. And gradually, she realized she was falling in love with him not because she had to, not because some contract required it, but because he had shown her what it meant to be valued as a person rather than judged as a burden. 2 months after Clara May's arrival, as autumn began painting the mountains in gold and crimson, their fragile peace was shattered. Silas had gone to town for supplies, leaving Clara May alone at the homestead for the first time. She was in the garden harvesting the last of the squash when she heard horses approaching. 2 men rode into the yard. One was the sheriff, looking uncomfortable, and the other was a stranger dressed in an expensive suit, his face sharp and calculating beneath a fashionable hat. Clara May stood slowly, her heart beginning to race with instinctive dread. "Can I help you?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. The stranger dismounted with practiced grace and approached her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Clara May Thompson? Or should I say Mrs. Blackwood?" "I'm Clara May Blackwood," she said, lifting her chin despite her fear. "Who are you?" "My name is Elias Thorne, representing the Atlantic Labor Exchange Company. I'm here on behalf of your stepfather, Gerald Thompson, regarding a matter of some legal complexity." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Thorne has documents that suggest your marriage to Silas Blackwood might not be legal." Clara May felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "What are you talking about? The marriage was properly arranged through the matrimonial agency." "Ah, but that's where the complications arise," Thorne interrupted smoothly, pulling a sheaf of papers from his jacket. "You see, before your stepfather arranged your placement through the matrimonial agency, he had already signed you into an indenture contract with our company. According to these legally binding documents, you are obligated to serve 7 years as an indentured servant to repay his substantial debts. The matrimonial arrangement was made without proper authorization and is therefore invalid." "That's a lie!" Clara May exclaimed, anger overriding fear. "My stepfather never mentioned any indenture. He told me he was sending me west to be married." "What your stepfather told you is irrelevant," Thorne said, his voice hardening. "The documents are legal and properly witnessed. You belong to the Atlantic Labor Exchange, Miss Thompson, and I'm here to collect you. You'll be placed in domestic service in San Francisco until your debt is paid." "I'm not going anywhere," Clara May said firmly. "I'm married to Silas Blackwood. This is my home." "Your marriage is invalid," Thorne repeated with exaggerated patience. "And if you refuse to come voluntarily, I'm authorized to take you by force. Sheriff, you've seen the documents. Surely you agree they supersede this questionable marriage arrangement?" The sheriff looked deeply unhappy. "Mr. Thorne's papers do look official," he admitted, "but I'm not comfortable removing a woman from her home without her husband present. Blackwood should have a chance to respond to these claims." "Then we'll wait for him," Thorne said, settling onto a tree stump as if he owned the place. "But make no mistake, the girl is coming with me one way or another." Clara May's mind raced. She needed to warn Silas, needed time to think. "Would you gentlemen like some coffee while you wait?" she offered, her voice surprisingly steady. "My husband should return within the hour." As she prepared coffee in the cabin, her hands shaking, Clara May tried to formulate a plan. The documents Thorne carried might be legal, but they were certainly fraudulent, her stepfather's final act of cruelty, finding a way to profit from her even after sending her away. If this labor exchange company paid him for her indenture, he would have gotten money from both them and the matrimonial agency. She would not let him destroy the new life she was building. Silas returned to find the 3 of them sitting in tense silence in his front yard, Clara May serving coffee with brittle courtesy, Thorne looking smug, and the sheriff appearing increasingly uncomfortable. The moment Silas saw them, his expression darkened with protective fury. "What's going on here?" he demanded, dismounting and moving immediately to Clara May's side. Thorne launched into his explanation, displaying his documents with theatrical flourish. As Silas listened, his jaw clenched tighter and tighter, his hands curling into fists. When Thorne finished, Silas spoke in a voice like gravel. "Those documents are fraudulent. Clara May's stepfather sold her twice, once to your company and once to the matrimonial agency. That's fraud, and it invalidates your claims." "Can you prove the fraud?" Thorne asked smoothly. "Because I assure you our documents are properly notarized and filed with the territorial court in San Francisco. Do you have similar documentation for your marriage?" Silas's face went pale. The truth was, he had never officially filed their marriage certificate with any court. The wedding had been performed by the town's part-time preacher, and the certificate was stored in his desk drawer. In the remote territories, such informal arrangements were common, but they were also legally vulnerable. "We're married," Silas insisted. "The preacher witnessed it. That's all that's required." "In the absence of proper legal filing, the indenture contract takes precedence," Thorne said triumphantly. "Now, Miss Thompson, gather your things. We're leaving." "No," Clara May said, her voice ringing with unexpected strength. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Thorne's pleasant facade cracked, revealing the cold operator beneath. "Then I'll have the sheriff remove you by force. You're property, girl, bought and paid for. You don't get a choice." "She's my wife," Silas growled, stepping between Thorne and Clara May, "and she's not going anywhere." The confrontation might have turned violent if the sheriff had not intervened. "Enough," he barked. "This is a legal matter, not a brawl. Both of you have documents supporting your claims, which means this needs to be settled in court. Blackwood, you and your wife need to appear before the territorial judge in Dust Devil Creek next Monday. Bring your marriage certificate and any other documentation you have. Mr. Thorne, you'll present your indenture papers. The judge will sort it out." "Fine," Silas bit out. "But Clara May stays here until the hearing. She's not going anywhere with this snake." Thorne looked ready to argue, but the sheriff gave him a warning look. "That's the way it's going to be, Mr. Thorne. The woman stays with her husband pending the court's decision. Now, I suggest you both cool down before someone does something regrettable." After the two men rode away, Clara May collapsed into Silas's arms, trembling with delayed reaction. He held her tightly, his own heart racing with fear and fury. "I won't let them take you," he promised fiercely. "I'll fight this with everything I have." "What if the documents are legal?" Clara May whispered. "What if the court decides I'm property after all?" "Then we'll run," Silas said without hesitation. "I know these mountains. We could disappear where no one would ever find us. I'd rather be an outlaw than let them take you." The following week was a whirlwind of preparation. Silas rode to town and hired the only lawyer within 100 miles, a sharp-eyed woman named Abigail Winters, who had made a reputation defending miners and homesteaders against corporate interests. When Silas explained the situation, her eyes lit with righteous fury. "Indenture contracts are legal," she admitted, "but they can be challenged on several grounds. If we can prove the stepfather committed fraud, or if we can demonstrate that Clara May's marriage takes precedence, we might win. The problem is time. Do you have any documentation showing when you first contacted the matrimonial agency?" Silas produced his letters, carefully preserved, showing the months of correspondence leading up to Clara May's arrival. Abigail studied them carefully. "This is good. It establishes intent and timeline. Now tell me about your marriage. Why wasn't it properly filed?" "It didn't seem important," Silas admitted. "Out here, we do things simply. The preacher said the words, we signed the certificate, and that was enough. I didn't think anyone would question it." "Someone is questioning it now," Abigail said grimly, "but we can work with this. The key is establishing that your marriage was entered into in good faith, based on legitimate arrangements through a recognized agency. Meanwhile, we'll attack the indenture contract on multiple fronts, questioning its validity, its timing, and whether it can supersede a marriage contract." Monday arrived with heavy clouds and the threat of rain, as if the weather itself reflected the tension of the day. Silas and Clara May rode into Dust Devil Creek in the pre-dawn darkness, both dressed in their best clothes, both terrified of what the day might bring. The courthouse was a simple building, but it was packed with townspeople eager to witness the drama. Judge Harlan presided, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness and a deep dislike of legal chicanery. He called the hearing to order and asked both sides to present their cases. Elias Thorne went first, laying out his documents with practiced precision. The indenture contract appeared legitimate, complete with Gerald Thompson's signature, Clara May's purported signature, and official-looking seals. "This contract was executed 3 months before Miss Thompson was sent west," Thorne explained. "It clearly establishes her as indentured property of the Atlantic Labor Exchange, obligated to 7 years of service. Any subsequent arrangements made without our company's knowledge or consent are invalid." Abigail Winters stood, her voice sharp and clear. "Your Honor, the defense challenges the authenticity of this contract on multiple grounds. First, the signature purported to be Clara May Thompson's is not her signature. Second, the contract itself is unconscionable, effectively selling a young woman into slavery. Third, and most importantly, the contract was created through fraudulent means by a stepfather who had already arranged to send his stepdaughter west through a legitimate matrimonial agency." She presented Silas's correspondence with the agency, showing that arrangements for Clara May's placement had begun 6 months before the indenture contract's date. Gerald Thompson essentially sold his stepdaughter twice, collecting fees from both parties. This is clear fraud, which invalidates the indenture contract. The judge examined both sets of documents carefully, his expression growing darker. "Miss Thompson," he said, addressing Clara May directly, "please approach the bench." Clara May stood on shaking legs and walked forward. The judge handed her a pen. "Write your signature for me, please." She signed carefully, her hand steady despite her nerves. The judge compared her signature to the one on the indenture contract, and his eyebrows rose. "These signatures are nothing alike," he observed. "Mr. Thorne, can you explain this discrepancy?" Thorne's confidence wavered for the first time. "The girl's signature may have changed over time," he offered weakly. "Not that dramatically," the judge said dryly. He turned back to Clara May. "Young lady, did you ever sign an indenture contract with the Atlantic Labor Exchange Company?" "No, sir," Clara May said firmly, finding her voice. "I never even heard of that company until Mr. Thorne arrived at our homestead. My stepfather told me he was sending me west to be married through a matrimonial agency. He said it was my only option, my only chance at a decent life. He never mentioned any indenture or debt. And your marriage to Mr. Blackwood, was that entered into willingly? Clara May looked at Silas, who sat watching her with such fierce protectiveness that her heart swelled. Yes, sir. Silas Blackwood has treated me with more respect and kindness than anyone in my life. He's given me a home, taught me to be useful, made me feel valued. I married him willingly, and I want to stay married to him. The judge studied them both for a long moment. Mr. Blackwood approached the bench. Silas stood and came forward, his broad shoulders square, his expression determined. The judge regarded him thoughtfully. You took this young woman into your home based on arrangements made through a matrimonial agency. You married her despite the fact that she was not what you expected. Why? Because she needed help, Silas said simply. Because I could see she'd been thrown away and hurt, and I wasn't going to add to that hurt by rejecting her. I married her because it was the right thing to do, and because I hoped we might build something good together. And have you? Built something good? Silas's face softened. We have, Your Honor. Clara May has made my homestead into a real home. She works hard, contributes equally to our life together. More than that, she's become my partner, my companion. I've come to love her, and I hope she might feel the same about me someday. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Clara May felt tears streaming down her face, but she did not care. Silas had just publicly declared his love for her in a courtroom full of the same people who had mocked her arrival months ago. The judge cleared his throat, but there was a suspicious brightness in his own eyes. Mrs. Blackwood, do you share your husband's sentiments? I do, Your Honor, Clara May said clearly. Silas Blackwood is the best man I've ever known. I love him with all my heart, and I want to spend my life with him on our homestead. Judge Harlan nodded slowly, then fixed Elias Thorne with a stern glare. Mr. Thorne, I've seen a lot of legal documents in my career, and I've seen a lot of frauds. Your indenture contract falls squarely into the latter category. The signature is forged, the timing is suspicious, and the entire arrangement reeks of the kind of human trafficking that civilized society should abhor. I'm declaring this contract invalid and fraudulent. Thorne leaped to his feet. Your Honor, you can't. I can, and I just did, the judge interrupted coldly. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the Atlantic Labor Exchange Company's practices. If I find that you've been trafficking young women under the guise of legal indenture, I'll see you prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He turned to Silas and Clara May, his expression warming. As for your marriage, while it was informally conducted, I'm satisfied that it was entered into in good faith by both parties based on legitimate arrangements. I'm officially recognizing and recording this marriage as legal and binding. Mrs. Blackwood, you are free to remain with your husband. No one has any legal claim on you. The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers. Even the townspeople who had mocked Clara May's arrival seemed moved by the genuine love displayed before them. Silas pulled Clara May into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go, and she clung to him, sobbing with relief and joy. Abigail Winters approached with a satisfied smile. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. I'll make sure all the paperwork is properly filed this time. You won't have to worry about anyone challenging your marriage again. As they left the courthouse, people approached to offer congratulations and apologies. The doctor who had shown kindness on Clara May's first day pressed her hand warmly. "You've done well, my dear. I'm glad to see you found happiness." Even the preacher who had married them appeared, slightly abashed. "I should have filed the certificate properly. I'm sorry for the trouble my negligence caused." "No harm done," Silas said generously. "Everything worked out as it should." The ride back to the homestead was quiet, both of them processing the emotional intensity of the day. As they crested the final ridge and looked down into their valley, now touched with the gold of late afternoon sun, Clara May spoke softly. "Did you mean what you said in court? That you love me?" Silas pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Every word," he said seriously. "I know I'm not good with pretty speeches, and I know our marriage started in the strangest way possible. But somewhere along the way, you became essential to me. I love you, Clara May, not despite who you are, but because of who you are, brave and kind and strong and beautiful." "Beautiful?" Clara May repeated, disbelief warring with hope. "Beautiful," Silas confirmed. "I see it every time you smile, every time you work in the garden, every time you laugh at something I say. You're beautiful to me, and that's all that matters." Clara May threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the love and gratitude and joy that had been building in her heart for months. Silas returned the kiss with equal passion, his strong arms wrapping around her, and for the first time since they had met, there were no barriers between them, no fears holding them back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Clara May smiled through happy tears. "I love you too, Silas Blackwood. You saved me, but more than that, you showed me I was worth saving. You gave me back my dignity, my strength, my hope. I want to be your wife in every way, to build our life together, to make our homestead into a real home for both of us." "It already is," Silas said, touching his forehead to hers. "But I'm glad we're finally on the same page about what that means." They continued down to the cabin as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. Inside, they built a fire and prepared dinner together, moving around each other with the easy familiarity of true partners. After they ate, Silas extended his hand to Clara May. "Would you like to come to my room tonight?" he asked softly. "As my wife?" Clara May took his hand, her heart full. "I would love that." Their coming together was tender and tentative, two people who had both been hurt, learning to trust and love. Silas was patient with Clara May's nervousness, and she was patient with his inexperience. What they lacked in skill, they made up for in genuine affection and mutual respect. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, both felt a deep sense of peace and belonging. The winter that followed was the happiest either of them had ever known. They worked side by side during the day, managing the homestead and preparing for spring planting. They read together by the fire in the evenings, Clara May discovering that Silas had an impressive collection of books and a sharp mind that loved discussing ideas and stories. They learned each other's bodies and hearts, growing more comfortable and confident in their intimacy. Clara May's writing, which she had always kept secret, flourished in the supportive environment Silas provided. She began documenting their life, the beauty of the mountains, the challenges and triumphs of homesteading. Silas encouraged her to submit her work to newspapers and magazines, proud of her talent. When her first piece was published in a regional newspaper, they celebrated with a special dinner and dancing in the cabin, Silas's strong arms guiding her through steps she was still learning. In spring, they planted the garden together, Clara May's expertise from the previous season making the work go more smoothly. She had ideas for expanding their vegetable plots and adding new crops, and Silas listened to her suggestions with respect, implementing her plans. The homestead was truly theirs now, a shared enterprise built on mutual effort and respect. One warm afternoon in May, as they rested under a tree after working in the garden, Clara May laid her head on Silas's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "That day at the station, when you could have refused me?" Silas wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "That day brought me the greatest blessing of my life. You're my partner, my love, my home. I wouldn't change a thing." "Not even the scandal? The court case? All the trouble?" "Not even that," Silas confirmed. "It was all worth it to have you here with me. Besides, the trouble brought us closer together. It forced us to fight for what we were building, to declare our feelings publicly. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations." Clara May smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. She had been sold by her stepfather, mocked by strangers, nearly stolen by corrupt men claiming legal ownership. But through it all, she had found Silas a man who saw her worth when no one else did, who stood beside her when the world tried to tear them apart, who loved her not despite her perceived flaws, but as a whole person deserving of respect and affection. Their marriage, born of desperation and necessity, had become something beautiful and true. They had proven that love was not about perfect circumstances or matching expectations, but about choosing each other day after day, about building something together through hard work and mutual respect. As the sun set over their valley, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Clara May thought about how far she had come from the terrified girl stepping off the stagecoach in Dust Devil Creek. She had found her strength, her voice, her purpose. Most of all, she had found home not just a place, but a person who made her feel safe, valued, and deeply loved. She looked up at Silas, this quiet, strong man who had changed her life with a single act of kindness, and knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. Their love had survived legal battles and social scorn. It would survive whatever came next. "I love you," she said simply, the words encompassing everything. She felt gratitude, passion, partnership, and the deep contentment of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. "I love you too," Silas replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always and forever." And in the peaceful valley they had claimed as their own, two unlikely souls who had found each other against all odds, settled into the quiet happiness they had fought so hard to build.